guys. I know your listeners can't see this, but that is the Ron Massey Cup replica trophy. There's a very large Ron Massey Cup, but that stays with the New South Wales Rugby League. This is the one that we've got to keep. So I think that's the first time we've shown it anywhere. So there you go. That's what all our hard work over 8 years, we've finally got one.
Hi guys. Today on the podcast, we have Darren Flynn, the president of the Glebe Dirty Reds. Glebe were one of the founding rugby league clubs in Australia before being controversially kicked out in 1929. After 87 years of non-existence, Glebe emerged from the ashes to play rugby league again. Darren takes us through the past, the present, and the future of the Dirty Reds. Just a friendly reminder to follow and share the podcast. It helps us to bring you more episodes which highlight the great work that people are doing to grow the game of rugby league all around the world. We hope you enjoy.
Balmain and South did a deal, and they were very powerful at Phillip Street at the time, the New South Wales Rugby League headquarters. As I understand it, as soon as the vote was completed, the rules were changed back to a 70% requirement.
Good evening, morning and afternoon, listeners. On today's podcast, we have Darren Flynn, who is the president of the Glebe Dirty Reds, one of the most historic rugby league clubs here in Australia and recent winners of the Ron Massey Cup. Darren, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Gentlemen, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Also in the recording studio, as always, is Stuart McClellan. McLennan. I always screw up your name, Stu. McLennan. How's your week been, Stu?
Yes, it's been good. Good, thanks, Keith. A bit windy here in Canberra, but I'm really happy that we've got Darren on here. As most people know, I grew up as a Balmain supporter, and of course Balmain's in the joint venture, albeit not doing very well at the moment. But Balmain doesn't have any representation at the senior level. It's got a couple of junior representative teams, but no. The name's not there at the senior level. So next door we've got Glebe Dirty Reds, and since Glebe was revived back in 2017, I've always taken a bit of an interest, albeit from afar at times. But yes, I'm really happy that we've got someone from Glebe Dirty Reds on the program. Congratulations on the grand final win, Darren, in the Ron Massey Cup. We'll delve into that a little bit more later on. But firstly, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to rugby league and the Glebe Dirty Reds in particular?
Yeah, Stuart, it's an interesting journey. I worked in radio for a number of years and primarily in rugby league radio for 2GB back in the early 2000s and then TUE subsequently. And so during that time, I'd spent a stint calling the New South Wales Cup. Firstly on 2SER, which is a radio station in Sydney, and then on a website called leaguetv.com.au. And through that became quite heavily involved with the Newtown Jets and the North Sydney Bears. And to cut a long story short, the group of us involved, who were all old schoolmates, thought, well, if these clubs can exist outside of the NRL and find a following, sort of retro rugby league, Saturday afternoons, 3:00 and get lots of families in and dogs and all the rest of it and have a pie and beer on the hill. Why can't we do it with the game's first club? And that's where the idea came from. It took a lot of work to get where we got to last Saturday, but that was the genesis of the journey. And for all the hard work, it's been a huge amount of fun for all involved.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. I, as a rugby league nerd, know of Glebe as a foundation club, but it's not a club that you sort of heard about all that often. It went the way of sort of the Sydney Uni kind of. People forget the Sydney Uni were at one stage in the New South Wales Rugby League or whatever it's called back then. But my question to you is, Glebe had obviously a relatively short history originally as a foundation club in 1908. And then they left the competition in 1929. Along the way, the club had a number of prominent players, including immortal Frank Burge. Can you tell us much about the club's early history?
Yeah, I can, quite fortuitously, because of the work of a historian called Max Solling. And Max moved into Glebe in the 1960s. And a lot of the former players were still alive in those days and were still living in Glebe. And so he, over a few beers, conducted some great oral history with those guys and noted down their stories. And so consequently, he's put together this book, An Act of Bastardry, which tells us all about those early days. But you're right, not a lot's known about the club, excuse me, outside of that historic work from Max. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to revive the club, because you're right, we've got an immortal in Frank Burge. We've got the only player in the history of the game in Chris McKibbett to captain both the Wallabies and the Kangaroos, which, when you think about it, is quite remarkable. But we've got another 10 internationals who've played for the club. And so it was important for us. We felt the game had largely forgotten Glebe, and who could blame them, really? There was no one there left to celebrate their players and their stories. So that was a big driving factor for us to bring the club back. The club had never won a first-grade title, although they won the 1911 minor premiership. Back in those days, if there was a Kangaroo Tour, the Kangaroo Tour the players would depart before the grand final. And so in 1911, Glebe had finished minor premiers. Then our Australian players left and went overseas. Daly Messenger opted not to tour that time because, of course, he toured in 1908 and he had a business to run. So he stayed behind and kicked, I think it was 4 goals in the final, and they ended up winning. Even though we scored 2 tries to 1, they ended up winning 11-8. So it was almost like the deck was stacked against us back in those days. We finished runners-up another 3 times in first grade. We had 6 reserve grade titles and 1 third grade title, and we won a City Cup. So we weren't completely without success. And to this date, I should point out, I think we still have the 5th best winning record in the history of rugby league at 55.7% win rate. So they were by no means an unsuccessful club, but that premiership victory in the top grade eluded them.
Darren, I've seen that Drummoyne Rugby Union Club, a club that I actually represented at one stage, were the original claims that they were the original Dirty Reds, but that's incorrect, I believe.
Well, technically, all teams that played in Glebe, and this is what I think some people don't realise about the Drummoyne Club. Drummoyne was and you may well know, Stuart, as a former player, but Drummoyne was an amalgamated club. It was Glebe and Balmain Rugby Union, both very strong before the advent of rugby league. But when rugby league came on, most of the players at those 2 clubs converted to the professional code, and of course that meant that the leftover union teams were not quite as strong. They amalgamated I think it was in the late 1920s. But they moved to Drummoyne in 1930. They kept the Dirty Reds nickname, as they'd always been a Glebe club. So the Glebe Hockey Club is Dirty Reds, the Glebe Rugby League team is the Dirty Reds, the Glebe Cricket Club is the Dirty Reds. And so the Glebe Rugby Union Club, also the Dirty Reds. They held on to that nickname when they amalgamated with Balmain and moved to Drummoyne. I suppose the confusion arose because there's not much Dirty Red in the Drummoyne uniform these days, as I understand it, or maybe the socks are still maroon, I'm not sure. But so they technically are Dirty Reds, just as the rugby league team is, all coming from Glebe originally.
Wow, I had no idea that was the case. I'll still claim that only Glebe rugby league team are the Dirty Reds in my mind, the OGs. Glebe, I alluded to before that Glebe left the competition in 1929. However, from my understanding is it was actually quite controversial in that they were kicked out of the competition in 1929. What were the reasons for that? And do you have any thoughts on whether they're legit?
Absolutely. I've got some very strong thoughts on that. I should say, first and foremost, Glebe were a very successful club through their first sort of 18, 19 years. They made the semi-finals in 1926 and almost made the grand finals. That was sort of their last successful year. It coincided, I think, with the last time that Frank Burge played for the club. And so they had been, after World War I, the number of players coming through probably dropped off a little bit, certainly in terms of their quality. The administration of the club was a little bit of an issue in the 1920s. They had some very strong administrators in their early years, but not quite so much towards the end of their time. But the truth is, at the end of the day, that Balmain and Souths did a deal, and they were very powerful at Phillip Street at the time, the New South Wales Rugby League headquarters. They did a deal to essentially do away with Glebe and take their territory. But it wasn't straightforward. You needed a 75% majority of votes in order to eliminate someone from the competition. They temporarily changed the constitution of the league so that only a bare majority was required. They did this with the connivance of a couple of other clubs who've been very helpful to Glebe in more recent times, so you can probably guess who they are.
Yep.
But in any event, those 4 clubs together, or representatives from those clubs in any event, changed the voting requirements to a bare majority, and Glebe were eliminated by 13 votes to 12. As I understand it, as soon as the vote was completed, the rules were changed back to a 70% requirement. So hence the title of Max's book, An Act of Bastardry. The clubs that supported Glebe were St George, Norths, the West Magpies and Sydney University. So certainly some skullduggery. But that's rugby league, I think, from day one. It wouldn't matter which club we're talking about. There's always a bit of self-interest involved. And I think for us, the important thing is that Glebe's back. It's a really positive story, and so pleased to win on the weekend. But certainly some murky history there involving a number of foundation clubs.
And the perfect use of the word skullduggery.
Thank you.
Talking about being back, tell us about the revival and how that came about and what you had to do to sort of get the club back running.
Yeah, so having alluded earlier to the conversations that me and some of my friends from St Pius X College at Chatswood, who are all old Pius boys, had over a few years about bringing back the club. That was probably the easy part. The hard part was coming up with the money and then convincing the New South Wales Rugby League that we were a viable option for a club. And obviously the league wants to encourage clubs wherever it can, but they would clearly be concerned about the viability of clubs and might have the cash for 1 year, but then drop out the next year. It's not a good look. So I think finding the sponsorship, and in Club York, our major sponsor, they've been our major sponsor for 8 years now. But without those guys, we wouldn't be here. So their support's been enormous over the course of the last 8 or 9 years. And I think once we secured Club York as our major sponsor, we were pretty confident we'd be able to, maintain the amount of funding required to have a team in the Ron Massey Cup. And that's turned out to be the case. We've obviously got a Sydney Shield team now as well. And the New South Wales Rugby League ultimately allowed us into the competition once we were able to convince them that we were able to mount a strong side. Fortuitously, and I think this is the one thing where we were really, really lucky, none of us had run a football program before, and we probably didn't have the amount of money needed to go and get, the best coaches and the best trainers and all the rest of it. There was another club involved in Ron Massey Cup at that time called Concord Burwood, who are a big junior club in the Balmain Junior League. Their coach, Aaron Zammett, was basically driving that whole club. And I was speaking to Greg Florimer. It had a bit to do with North, helping them out with some media. And Flo said, look, you really should talk to Aaron because they're struggling in terms of money. And I think you guys have got the money. He's got the football brain. So you both come together, then it'll be a marriage made in heaven. So for a couple of years, we competed as Glebe Burwood, but then Concord Burwood dropped out and it was just Glebe. But without that period, I don't think we would have seen the success that we've subsequently enjoyed. I mean, we only missed the finals once and we've made 3 grand finals in what is effectively 7 seasons because 2021 was cancelled. So can't underscore or understate the importance of Aaron Zammett's football program at Concord Burwood. We were really lucky to stumble upon Aaron, and we're still affiliated with Concord Burwood. They're one of our A grade teams, so there's still a strong relationship there between both clubs.
Running a Ron Massey Cup and Sydney Shield side obviously takes a fair bit of financial support. Where do the funds come from? Is it just Club York or is there any other sources?
No, Club York's our biggest sponsor, but we have a number of other really loyal sponsors like Garley's Pies. Jackson Garlic from the Garley's Pies organisation, of course, played for Glebe for the first 7 years or most of the first 7 years of the club's existence. So he had a really strong link to Glebe, but Garley's have been a huge supporter of ours for a number of years. We've got a whole range of sponsors, including the Friend in Hand Hotel at Glebe, Exact Concrete, whole heap of small businesses that throw their support behind us. The Roosters contribute financially as well. And we also make a lot of money from our game day operations and from merchandise. So we're inspired there, obviously, by the likes of Newtown, who made rugby league clothing really fashionable probably about 10 years ago. You'd want to be seen at any NRL match wearing some sort of Newtown merchandise. So we were inspired by those guys, and we've done really well out of our merchandise as well. But you're right, it's a constant battle to try and find enough money. Your costs are going up every year. Your sponsorship doesn't necessarily go up each year. So you've got to find ways to get that money. And we're really lucky to have a big band of volunteers. It's an entirely volunteer-run club. So people are prepared to stand out there and take money on gates and sell merchandise at games. And yeah, it's a hard slog, but we've got a good group that makes it all happen.
Great. And does the club field women's and juniors teams at present, Darren?
No, not at present, Stuart. We were in the Harvey Norman Premiership back in 2020. The league made some changes to requirements for participation in that competition that saw us drop out. And then obviously with COVID, there was some financial challenges. So we didn't look to get back in 2022. But it's certainly something that we're keen to do now. I think the only thing holding us back in terms of the women's game at the moment is access to training grounds, access to playing facilities. We're really fortunate to be back at Wentworth Park, but we share that with the Roosters New South Wales Cup and Jersey Flegg. And when you add the Sydney Shield and Ron Massey games, we're sometimes playing 4 games a weekend there. The Greyhounds have an exclusive license on Saturdays, which makes it hard for us to get on. So the big challenge there is just finding a place for the women to train and play. It's less about the money. But we're really hopeful that we'll be able to field a women's team again. If not next year, then certainly it'll be a priority for 2026. We have fielded juniors teams before. I think the challenge with trying to be a senior semi-professional club and a junior club as well is without the backing of a big licensed club, like a big leagues club, tipping in hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, you're relying on the help of volunteers and parents. And in the 2 years we had junior teams, it was very challenging. So what we're embarking upon is a sort of top-down growth strategy. So next up will be probably an under-20s side, a men's side and a women's seniors team, and then we'll just feed down. And if there's growing interest at under 16s level, we'll feed down again and so on and so forth. But it's all part of a journey, and we've sort of you got to walk before you run. And if we try and take on too much, I think it's at risk of collapsing. So it'll take a little bit longer, but we'll get there in the long run.
Yeah, love that answer. Coming back to your answer from a couple of questions ago, we all agree that Newtown has made retro trendy again with the inner city games at Hanson Park. I myself think beer, food and footy all in the one place on the same day is my idea of heaven, although I do go to the North Sydney Oval version because I grew up within walking distance of North Sydney Oval and I absolutely love that ground. Is there something that you'd look to do to make Glebe retro again and sort of promote that kind of themed day or event at Wentworth Park?
Yeah, look, it's a good question because you're right. It's been a huge success for Newtown, and I didn't get to the North one this year, but I was disappointed I couldn't make it. Like you, I grew up in the Northern Beaches area of Sydney, but I probably watched more football at North Sydney Oval in the early 90s, despite the fact that I was a Dragons fan. I probably watched more games at North Sydney Oval. I sat on the field when they had 23,000 against Manly and they couldn't fit any more in the Oval. They'd let you go and sit on the playing surface. So I have a really soft spot for that ground. We'd love to do something similar at Glebe. I think we're careful not to borrow too heavily from the Newtown experience. We don't want to copy what they're doing. We tried something this year with a Super Saturday concept, which was footy, greyhound racing, and pie eating, which went okay. Didn't win the type of numbers that we've seen at beer, food, and footy, but was certainly worth trying. It was a fascinating afternoon, I can tell you that.
They were Garlo's pies, were they?
Absolutely, they were Garlo's pies, and we had about 16 people lining up in various heats to try and eat the most in 3 minutes. So it was. I've got the video somewhere. I'll share it with you at some point. But it was an interesting afternoon. I think what we'd be looking to do next year, there is going to be some sort of event day on a Sunday, and we're restricted. We can't really do anything on Saturdays unless it involves greyhounds, because they've got the license on Saturday nights. But we'll look to do something interesting and innovative next year to get more people into the venue. That's for sure.
Sounds great. So Glebe, as you mentioned before, has a feeder club arrangement with the Sydney Roosters. How is that going, and is it something you want to continue?
It's going really, really well. The reason why we partnered with the Roosters, well, there are a number of reasons for it. I think firstly, if you're trying to run a professional sporting organisation in Australia, albeit in our case a semi-professional club, but if you're trying to be the best semi-professional club in Australian Rugby League, you probably don't have a better model on which to try and emulate than the Sydney Roosters, a club that has enjoyed a lot of success over the course of particularly over the course of the last sort of 15, 20 years, but certainly it's been a successful club for a very, very long period of time. And obviously Nick Politis is a big part of that, but they're just so well run across the board. And we've been dealing through our time with Daniel Anderson, their head of pathways, and also Craig Walker, their general manager of football. They have a vision for what they want out of Glebe, and I think we kind of share that vision. We see ourselves as a development club. We've had 13 players go on from representing Glebe to go on and make their NRL debut, and so I think that's why the Roosters are partnered with us, and we want to see more and more of our players go on to represent the Sydney Roosters at a higher level. We had 4 or 5 players this year who were Glebe contracted who actually played New South Wales Cup for the Roosters. Too often feeder clubs only benefit from the players that drop down. We want to make sure that we're providing support to the Roosters at the other end. So if they do go through a period of injury crisis, that players can step up from Glebe and play for the Roosters. And ideally, as we go on and have a lot of younger players come through our system, we'd love to see some of them actually go on and play first grade for the Roosters or other clubs, but certainly for the Roosters in the first instance. The other reason why we partnered with the Roosters was they wanted Wentworth Park as well for us, but also for their New South Wales Cup and Jersey Flag teams. There's not a lot of available green space in the inner city and eastern suburbs of Sydney that's available and up to the required standard. Wentworth Park, for all of its challenges, is a very old venue in many respects. It ticks a lot of boxes. And so we're really lucky there to be essentially the only user of the Oval. The school, St Andrew's Cathedral School, do use it for PE, but there's no other senior adult sporting teams using it. So that's a big part of the reason. We wanted to move home to Wentworth Park, and the Roosters made that possible for us. They've got the financial acumen and ability to get us there, whereas for us it was always going to be a bit of a challenge, but that was a big carrot for us.
Yeah, they're a club that does a lot more for the game than people actually realise. And I know Nick Politis and the club spots California Rugby League through Roosters team there to the tune of maybe $500,000 or something like that. Stu and I were talking about that. But my next question, a bit of a long-winded one, because I'll provide both yourself and the listeners context to this. A couple of days ago, I was so excited to have you on the podcast that I posted on probably the biggest rugby league forum that I know of, which is League Unlimited. All I did was type in the term Glebe or Dirty Reds or something like that. I didn't actually look at what thread it was. And it turned out to be in the West Tigers thread because David Nolfaluma has recently played for you guys. And I asked, does anyone want to ask you any questions? And one guy who has the username Nuts and the moniker Peanut Butter Man said, what comments or questions should we be asking? What does the Dirty Reds do for the West Tigers? So I think he's a bit dirty about the fact that I don't know, you guys are partnered with the Roosters or something. But you know what? I'm going to ask the question anyway. Do you guys do anything for the West Tigers by any chance?
Well, the West Tigers have already got a Ron Massey Cup feeder team in Ryde Eastwood. So Ryde Eastwood, a big leagues club up at West Ryde, and a football club with a very strong history going back to the 1960s. They've been a mainstay at this level of football for on and off, but for the better part of 50 or 60 years. The West Tigers, in truth, don't need Glebe. I don't think there's ever been a conversation, certainly not in my time, maybe with Concord Burwood when they first came into Sydney Shield and Ron Massey, there may have been a conversation, but for us, we've never been approached by the West Tigers. The only clubs that have been interested in being partnered with Glebe have been North Sydney in the first year, Newtown in the next 4 or 5, and then the Sydney Roosters. So I don't know. I'd love to think that the West Tigers need support from Glebe. I don't think they do. They've got the support of a big leagues club at West Ashfield. They've got a big junior league to draw on out at Macarthur, and certainly even in the inner west of Sydney. So I don't think they need us, but certainly we've had some players that have gone on to play for the West Tigers in New South Wales Cup and even in first grade, actually. I think Thomas Freeburn might have played a game or two for the West Tigers.
Yep.
But yeah, look, we're Glebe, they're the West Tigers. We're in the same area. We coexist happily. We wish them well, obviously, and I'm pretty sure they wish us well too.
Yeah, great answer. And shout out to Nuts with a Z, who actually sort of clarified in his next post very respectfully, pointing out that I posted in the wrong section. So there you go. Your question's answered anyway. How has this is actually my question now. How has the local community of Glebe responded to having a semi-professional rugby league club to support?
Yeah, really well. It's sort of been a bit of a slow burn because in the early days, in 2017, we couldn't get on to Wentworth Park. So we played most of our games at Goddard Park over at Concord and played a few games at North Sydney Oval from memory as well. 2018, we were over at Henson Park, but we did make our first appearance at Wentworth Park. We were allowed to play a pre-season game there and got a very big crowd. And we put flyers up all around the local community and all the local pubs. And it was great to see people streaming down St John's Park Road just to come into the main entrance there at Wentworth Park. We didn't move back full time until last year. So as I say, it's been a bit of a slow burn. I think familiarity is what breeds habit, and the fact that we've been there, pretty much every second weekend for the last 2 years, we've seen a lot more Glebe locals coming in. And I think the best indicator for us is when you look at where our merchandise sales are coming from. There's been an explosion in the number of people buying our gear who live in Glebe, Forest Lodge, even Ultimo and Piedmont as well. And that's a pretty good indicator that the locals are now starting to embrace the site again. We've still got a bit of work to do on the community engagement front. I know one of the things we'd like to do next year is to get some of our players into local schools. Obviously players have got jobs during the week, but there are one or two who'd be interested in doing it, and we might be able to sling a 50 their way to make it more enticing for them. But just to get those players in front of kids and do a few sessions with them, I think they then talk to mum and dad and say, look, we should go down and watch Glebe on the weekend. There's a real connection between the club and the local community. So we'll keep working on that. I said before, we're volunteer run, so there's a limit to how much we can do in a short period of time. But that's the goal and the dream for us, is to be able to have our players walk down Glebe Point Road and be recognised. That would be an absolute dream come true.
Definitely. As you mentioned before, there's been a number of Glebe players go on to play NRL since the club restarted in 2017. As president, how does that make you feel when you see that happening?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's why we do what we do. I mean, we love when new players come to the club and buy into the culture. But we don't necessarily, in all instances, want them to stay forever. I'll give you a really good example. And this is not a player who's gone on to play NRL, but one who's gone on to play in the English Super League, a bloke called Ethan Natoli. Ethan came from the eastern suburbs, or more like the South Sydney Junior League. I think he was from sort of Maroubra, Coogee area. And he was playing for Coogee Wombats. I think he was at the stage where he was almost going to give away the dream of playing at a professional level. He was about 21, 22. He came to us during 2020, the President's Cup year, and surprisingly, in that year, a lot of our mainstay players were New South Wales Cup players. Their competition got cancelled that year, so we had a really, really strong squad in 2020. But Ethan kept forcing his way in, pushing out some of these more fancied guys. And he backed up the following year, and it's really 2022 is probably the best player in the competition. He certainly won out the Frank Burge Medal for the Player of the Year. Ethan ended up signing with the London Broncos in 2023 and played in the championship. And of course, they had the ultimate fairy tale last year when they knocked out Toulouse and went on to earn a spot in Super League. We would love to have Ethan around. It would have been great if Ethan stayed the last 2 years. We'd love to win a premiership with him this year. But it gives us so much joy and satisfaction that he's gone on to recognise a lifelong dream, and we played a part in that journey. So it gives us a huge thrill. We had, I think, 3 or 4 make their first grade debut in the NRL this year as well, and Jesse Marshkey was one. Trent Talau was another out at Penrith. Jacob Gagai was one at Souths, and Lorenzo Mulatalo at Parramatta. So to have 4 players and those guys didn't play 1 or 2 games for us. They weren't just Newtown players or Cronulla players who dropped back. They played a significant number of games in each instance. So it was a huge thrill to see those guys make their debut, and let's hope there are many more in the years to come.
Definitely. On the other side, you had ex-NRL players, David Nofaluma and Dean Farday, in the team this year. How did that come about?
It's interesting in all cases, actually. Kane Evans was the first one who came. We spoke to Kane last year after he got back from Hull, and he was sort of on a holiday on his way home from the UK, so it didn't quite work out before the June 30 deadline last year. But he was the first one to sign up, and he was there in pre-season. Dean was interesting. We've been talking to Dean for well over 12 months. I'd noticed that Dean had shifted into the halves, playing for Pia in France, and we were on the lookout for some reinforcements in the halves last year. He ended up going to London Broncos, and then off the back of that, he went to Pia again. So we couldn't get him for the start of this year. But I was watching Pia's game on the internet, their elimination semi-final. And the second they lost, I messaged Aaron Zammit, our coach, and said, right, give it an hour or 2 and then get in contact with Dean. That's exactly what he did. He was back, I think, within a week and a half. Yeah, and then he was playing for us 2 weeks later, and he was absolutely huge for us. He's the nicest bloke you'll ever meet, but a great club man and really keen to hand down to younger players all the lessons he's learnt playing 20 tests for New Zealand and whatever it was, over 150 first grade games. So he's been enormous for us. David was a little bit different, and he came just before the June 30 deadline. That was a contact through Aaron Zammit, so I wasn't involved in David's other than signing off on the offer. David ultimately, I think, came through because we have a couple of other West Tigers youngsters like Iverson Fuatamau and Mavoni Tuafua at the club this year. So in any event, David came on board and his attitude was outstanding. He was so good on the weekend. I'm not sure if you guys saw the grand final, but he scored 2 tries.
Yeah,
He saved an absolute certain try at the other end. What people don't realise about David's performance on the weekend, and this is what just adds to the buzz around David, he injured himself on Wednesday at training at Wentworth Park, walking onto the field through an area that wasn't lit up. He's sort of trodden a little hole on the turf and couldn't train on Wednesday, couldn't train on Friday in the captain's run, and very nearly was ruled out of the grand final. And you can see it when you watch the grand final back on online now. You can't tell when he's hitting the ball up or when he's making a tackle, but when he's walking back into the defensive line, he's limping really badly. So when you consider that, it was one of the great, I know it's Ron Massey Cup, but it was one of the great grand final performances. He was outstanding this year. Kane got injured a little bit, so we didn't see as much of him. But those 2 guys, Dean and David, were outstanding, as was Craig Garvey, former NRL player himself,
Yes.
our hooker and captain and the Ron Massey Cup player of the year this year.
And I noticed that Dean was actually playing halfback on the team list, which is an unusual position for him, being more an outside back.
Absolutely. He has been playing in the halves for Pia for the last 2 years.
Okay.
And so, when I told Aaron he's actually been playing halfback over there, it's like, really? Because you're right, he only ever played in the centres, on the wing. I think he might have played a little bit of fullback as well at various times, but never in the halves. But his kicking game has been outstanding for us. He's just got the ball on the string, and in terms of his creativity as well, he doesn't touch the ball as much as Jay Tapari, our 5'8", on the other side of the field. When he does, the judgment and just the total calm he exudes across the whole park. We were so lucky to have him. Those guys, when you bring big names in, you hope that they're going to stand up in the big games, and those guys definitely did. Yeah,
and so 2024, obviously a hugely successful year for you, and you've mentioned the players. But what was the key to the success of the team this year?
I think culture is always a big part of it. Clearly, you need talented players, and we had them across the park. I'm not exaggerating when I say there was not one position where I felt that we were vulnerable. We had a really strong squad. Sometimes that happens by chance. Other times you recruit really well, but it's often a combination of the two. And so we had a couple of players this year who had come to us, our former NRL pathway talents who were in New South Wales Cup set up to, for whatever reason, had found themselves being let go by their clubs, looking for a second chance and really taking it with both hands. So I think the culture that Aaron brings to the club, I'm not making any disparaging remarks about any other coaches. I can only speak in relation to Aaron, but he encourages the players to enjoy themselves and to take risks. And in a day and age where there's a strong impetus against risk-taking in football at certain clubs, and certainly that's been the NRL experience for a little while, it's starting to change a little bit in more recent times. But Aaron always tells the players, if you try something and it doesn't work, I'm not gonna get angry. I'm not gonna drop you. Just back yourself. Don't do silly things, but when you think it's on, back yourself, and that's the way we attack. And I think any club in the competition this year would say the one thing that worried them was if we ever got our defence in order, but there's no way in the world they could stop us from scoring 4 or 5 tries a game. That pretty much turned out to be the case throughout the back end of the season. So I think what ultimately got us over the line was the commitment to defence that was made. We got beaten by Canterbury 52-6 or 52-8 in round, I think it was the third last round of the regular comp. And at that stage, I think we're all like, well, maybe it won't be our year. But there was a bit of a truth session after that game, and they made a commitment to work hard defensively together for each other. And after that point in time, I don't think anyone scored more than 3 tries against us in a game. And we won all of the finals matches by 13 plus. So defence was the key, but culture is really what bound them all together, and I think that's what got us the win.
Yeah, what a fantastic answer as well. This is a question not on the run sheet. I'm going to Vegas in 6 months' time, and I think I'd be the coolest guy in the crowd if I rock up in a Glebe Dirty Reds jersey. Where can I get one?
You absolutely would be, and you can get them from our website, which is dirtyreds.com.au/store. So we've got 3 different types of jerseys for sale. So you can have there's even an old lace-up jersey, which is a replica of the one that Glebe wore for such a long period in their early installment. So
I love that. That's the one I'm getting. All right. Well, I've actually only got a couple of questions to go. Oh, really only one. Is Ron Massey Cup the right level for Glebe to compete at, or do you have any ambitions to go higher up to the New South Wales Cup?
Oh, look, we'd love to go up to New South Wales Cup. I think the truth is at the moment there's a real trend towards NRL clubs fielding their own teams in New South Wales Cup, and there may at some point be a national reserve grade competition. It's often talked about. There's been no movement on that in recent years. But just today, I think Manly's announced that they discontinued their feeder relationship with Blacktown Workers to put their own team in. So New South Wales Cup might not ever pan out. If it does, we'll be there ready to roll. I think what might be more likely is when we do see all NRL clubs fielding their own feeder teams, that maybe there will be a bigger state cup. Hopefully with teams like Balmain, Stuart, at some stage in the future.
That'd be nice.
Certainly with the West Magpies, who knows? I mean, obviously I hope Newtown and Norths remain in and Wests remain in New South Wales Cup, but if they ever move to a different state cup, that's where we'd want to be. And I think that's a realistic ambition, but you never know what's around the corner in rugby league. So we'll see how it goes. We just want to be the best development club in New South Wales. That's always been our goal. We want to keep churning out players. So I think the growth for us will be downwards, under 20s next, and back into the women's game.
Yeah, very nice. If I was back living in the West, I'd be down there at Wentworth Park with you, doing anything you needed, pumping up footies or anything like that, because I really enjoy hearing about the club and what they're doing, and I'll keep following, and I'll get onto the website and get some merch as well, I think. So.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Keith. Look, it's been great to have a chat with you guys. I know your listeners can't see this, but that is the Ron Massey Cup replica trophy. There's a very large Ron Massey Cup, but that stays with the New South Wales Rugby League. This is the one that we've got to keep. So I think it's the first time we've shown it anywhere. So there you go. That's what all our hard work over 8 years, we've finally got one.
And I believe it's the first title since 1927, which was a third grade title. Am I right in saying that?
You are in terms of a premiership trophy. We did win the 2020 Challenge Cup, which was a knockout competition. We beat the Wentworthville Magpies at Henson Park that day.
Nice.
So that was our most recent trophy. But you're right, the last premiership trophy was the third grade comp in 1927. So it's a long time between drinks.
I've absolutely loved this. It's been an enthralling interview. I guess any last thoughts from you, Darren?
Guys, look, thank you very much for the interest. I just say to everyone who enjoys the lower levels of rugby league, and I shouldn't call them the lower levels, but enjoys those semi-professional levels of rugby league, you're clearly not alone. There's a big interest and appetite in football below the NRL. If you haven't been to Wentworth Park at all in the past, make sure you get there in 2025. It's a great Sunday afternoon of football. And hopefully people can make it part of their annual rugby league ritual. We'll get to North Sydney Oval, get to Lidcombe Oval, get to Henson, and Leichhardt, of course, but make Wentworth Park an additional stop on the rugby league journey.
And there's a tram there, so no excuse, people. You can have as many beers as you want and still get a good public transport back. But Stu, any final words?
No, as I said, I just really very interested in what Darren and Glebe are doing there, and it's the grassroots, sort of semi-professional stuff is in Sydney is fantastic, and long may it continue.
Absolutely. Well, Darren Flynn, absolute pleasure having you on, mate, and maybe I'll see you at a game.
Sounds good, Keith. Stuart, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Darren.
Thanks for listening to Everything Rugby League. If you like this episode, give the show a follow and leave a review. For more news and insights, follow us on Facebook or head to everythingrugbyleague.com.